So a lot's changed in Platform SSO over the last couple of years. If you remember, I did a session about 2 years ago where we kind of kicked off some of the new cool things. Sadly, a lot of those have not been picked up by any of the vendors that are actually doing anything with PSSO. So we're going to show you some more stuff that may or may not be picked up. But we'll have a conversation about why that might be. And certainly it'll be good directionally to understand where Apple is going and kind of what their intents are with some of the Platform SSO pieces. So we're going to talk about changes in Tahoe, specifically the ability to have Platform SSO registration during the Apple device enrollment process, which is pretty cool because I think it's one of the most requested features that has probably ever been around Platform SSO, which is the idea of, can we have this first user on the box enrolled in SSO from the instant that they're created? And so you can now do that in Tahoe. So we're going to walk through that. I have a little Mac Mini under here. I gotta say, once we move to Apple Silicon, the only complaint I have about Apple Silicon is not being able to set a serial number in a VM. So you have to do this with actual hardware now to be able to do it. So we got a Mac Mini running under here. We're gonna do some live cooking that should work out well. So we're gonna talk about the ADE flows. We're gonna talk about kind of alternatives. Already you're seeing some of the vendors, and I think some of that will be talked about later on this week, looking at using Platform SSO in other ways. You have a lot of options now. And in fact, the amount of permutations that you have with how and when and where you deploy Platform SSO has it's quite a bit. So we'll talk about that a little bit as to how maybe you want to go the full way with the ADE integration, maybe not. A brief conversation around authenticated guest mode, tap to log in, and then as always, I like to do some guided Q&A, so I'll ask the questions and give the answers, and hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier. And then if we have time after that, we can go into a loosely guided Q&A where you get to ask the questions, and maybe I'll give some answers, or at least as best I can on that. All right. So our story so far, for the most part, there's 2 vendors that have come out with Platform SSO functionality, right? And the biggest one that you see a lot of is Microsoft. They've got a session here. Mark, probably in the room. There he is. He's got a session on that a little bit. So you can ask the specific Microsoft questions there. Okta, they've done some work with Platform SSO. I think they call it their desktop MFA. They've got a particular term for it. Microsoft has definitely embraced a lot more of the Platform SSO functionality than I think Okta has. But I will say that there's still a fair amount of Platform SSO functionality that no vendor has really put out there. Some of that we're going to show here. I showed some things off 2 years ago that I still haven't seen anybody pick up. But that's a different conversation. So these are the 2 main ones that are out there. And like I said, there's a couple of new big features in Tahoe that are coming out. And in particular, the one that a lot of people have been talking about has been the ADE support. So the ability to have that Platform SSO registration during the automated Apple device enrollment flows. So let's do that. I think that'd be really cool that we could do that. So, but first we got to do some basics. Who actually knows how authenticated ADE works? There's got to be a few hands, yeah, because we got MDM vendors in the room. So for those of you who aren't MDM vendors, we'll give you a quick primer on what happens today in what should be the most common scenario with ADE, which is where you have an actual authentication event that happens. So you've got your Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager up on the right-hand side. My dyslexia is going to kill me here. You've got your identity provider in the middle, and then you've got your device management system on the other side there, otherwise known as an MDM. When you boot the machine up, right, it goes out to Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager, and it pulls down a configuration. It's a little annoying in that this is referred to in some of the documentation as an enrollment profile, but it's not the enrollment profile that you're expecting or would use with your actual MDM service. So instead, the colloquial term for this is a cloud config. And in that cloud config, it's got a configuration web URL that typically goes to your MDM. Your MDM then typically will send the user over to an OpenID Connect or a SAML authentication flow. All right, so that then bounces you back to the OpenID Connect provider. In this case, this would be your IDP. Your IDP shows a little bit of a web page. You sign in, you do some MFA most likely. You get back some tokens. Those tokens are that assertion if you're using SAML, then go to the MDM service, and then the MDM service gives you the actual enrollment profile that you would expect. All right, and that enrollment profile has a server URL, has some SCEP information typically, maybe now Acme, that takes you through that device getting a certificate, and then you're enrolled in MDM at that point, and there's a little bit of back and forth, and then you get all these config profiles, all right? So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So now that we have that, let's go into what the new ADE PSSO flow goes. Now, the first part about this, though, as a community, I think we have to come up with some terminology. In some places, I've seen this referred to as a simplified setup for PSSO. I got to tell you, there's nothing really simple about it. So I'm a little hesitant to use that term. And I've also heard that term used by some of the MDM vendors to maybe refer to some other things. And so today, for the 20th anniversary of Mac Sysadmin, I'm going to propose that we just pronounce this as Adepso. I kind of like this for a couple reasons. One, it's kind of catchy, Adepso. That's kind of, sounds like, I don't know, a drug or one of those names that's not patent infringing and doesn't mean anything in 38 languages. So I appreciate as an older Mac admin, the DEP being back in it. So we can get back to the device enrollment program in there. So all right, So I'll take that rousing round of applause as unanimous consent that from now on we're calling this Adepso as the ADE PSSO enrollment process. All right, so let's talk about Adepso. A lot of options to it. You have a lot of configuration, which is good. Configuration is great. There's some pitfalls maybe that we'll talk about a little bit in just how some of these flows happen and how there's some specifics that have to go in there. And then there's a lot of moving parts to it, which is back to like, I've got some issues with maybe using the term simple for it. Even for the user, I don't know if it's overly simplified. They do get forced into it, and it does create that initial user. So big check boxes there on that part of it. So first user is created directly from your IDP. There's some conversations we can have about when you might have authentications and when you won't. And then there's also the two very kind of competing flows that most people are using PSSO with. One is the password-based synchronization, and the other one is the SE keys. So just creating SE back keys for that user, and then using those keys to get tokens. I'm a big fan of the SE keys. The problem is that in ADP, or in ADE, excuse me, in Adepso, you still need a username and password to create that initial user on the system. So even if you are using PSSO with the SE keys, you're still going to have a username or password function in here. I'll show you how that works very shortly. So we're back to kind of the same flows, right? We got a device down in the bottom center. We've got your Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager in the upper right. For FYI today, we're going to be using Apple School Manager. It's otherwise completely transparent as to which one you're using. The functionality is 100% the same. And then you've got the IDP in the middle, and you've got your MDM service then on the right-hand side as you're looking at that slide. And it starts off very similar. Your device, wakes up, finds the internet, and then reaches out to your Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager, and it'll pull down a config. The difference is you're not using that web configuration URL that was used previously in ADE if you wanted to do an authenticated ADE. So this is a different key in this profile. This is normally where just your standard enrollment profile would be. If you weren't using an authenticated ADE, this would be where you would go. The difference here is when you follow that URL, instead of getting an enrollment profile, you actually get a 403. And the 403 means can't go here, right? You get stopped. You need to authenticate before you can go further. The difference with a 403 as opposed to like a 401, 403 has things that come back with it. And this is the magic of Adepso, is that you get three things. One is optional, but you definitely get 2. 2. The first one is you get a package to install, all right? This is a package to install before the device is actually enrolled in MDM. So it's a pretty cool thing right there. You also get a config profile. That config profile is something that's laid down before you're in MDM. All right, so two very interesting things. And then the third one, which is optional, is an auth URL. And that auth URL effectively replicates what that ADE authentication was in the ADE flows that we have going down in there. All right, fantastic. Here we go. All those land down on the device. The device goes, great, I've got all these things. It installs the package. It sets up the configuration profile. You're going to see that as we go through that. Once those are done, it will then negotiate with your PSSO service much like it does today. So you're going to see potentially a screen for device registration. You're also potentially going to see a screen for user registration, and you may see a screen for username and password. I'm going to walk you through all of those because we're going to do a password flow and then an SE key flow so you can see that. Once that registration is done, you get some tokens. That's the whole point of Platform SSO. That's fantastic. You then get bounced to the auth URL. The auth URL can't use those tokens. That's why there's the asterisk there. It's a long story, I think, about various systems and security agents and things like that. But you do get sent to a web page that you probably are going to sign into, especially if you're using an SE key flow. However, the PSSO agent is not actually active at that point. So the user is most likely going to have potentially another authentication at that stage. That comes back then with a 308. Not a 403, but a 308, which is a redirect, and that should have some sort of authorization code in it. That authorization code then gets sent to the MDM. The MDM says, oh, great, I know what this is, and will send back the enrollment URL. The device will then actually enroll in MDM, do all the certificate pieces, and then have all the MDM things pushed down. Fantastic, right? Hey, don't clap yet. Let me show it to you. And if it works, then you can clap. All right, so we're about to do a demo. I will say this demo is brought to you by DFU Blaster. Since this is an ADE flow, you have to have real hardware. And if things go wrong, you're going to be DFUing the system. So help out Tim, Two Canoes Software, great place, and get DFU Blaster. I think he wrote an iOS app, right, to tell you which port to actually plug the cable in for DFU, because that gets confusing. I think he wrote the app because I kept calling him up and saying, Tim, it's not working. What port do I plug it into? And then Cursor. Cursor did all the UI HTML for me. So that made the kind of coding process on here a lot faster. And I apologize for any hallucinations in advance. All right, so we're going to do this live. And I think this is all going to work. I have a little keyboard. I have a mouse. And I have a Mac Mini down there, and if I hit, hey, all right. So let's make this big. And for the first time through, and for the amusement of people in the audience, we're going to pick Swedish. All right, so we're going through a standard ADE flow right now. This caught me up a little bit. I came in last night around 9 p.m., and so that meant I woke up at 4:30 this morning, and I said, well, let's make sure all the demos work. And it started giving me a Swedish keyboard layout. And I was using a password that has characters that don't make any sense to me in the keyboard anymore. So, and you can hear it. It's saying macOS has a built-in screen reader, but it's in Swedish that's down there. I think I can turn up the sound. There we go. All right. I've never heard it in another language before, so that's actually pretty cool. I believe I've just got muscle memory from doing this so many times. It's the one in the bottom. All right, and then as we're doing this, I'll actually show you. We got some magic going on. So this is our actual MDM service. Well, not an MDM service. This is our ADP Adepso proxy. You don't actually have to have an MDM or an IDP that know anything about what's going on here. All of this can actually be done with just a proxy that's coordinating the right calls to the right places. And so that's what this is running in Visual Studio in the background there. So as we go through this, Once we get at various points, we'll stop and you'll see what's coming across. All right, so this is where the magic is about to happen. I'm going to go great. I love Sweden and Swedish keyboards, so let's go for it. I don't need any accessibility. And already you're seeing what you would normally expect to see for an MDM enrollment, right? This is what you would see. You can see Jump Cloud Developer is on there. The difference here is that you're not actually going to enroll in MDM. Instead, we've received that 403, and we're about to download the package and a few other things here, right? So as soon as I click Registrera, did I get that right? All right, all right. Registrera, better? All right. I will not try to like say what's going on right now. That would be a little bit. But I think this says downloading a profile, right? All right, and now you're seeing installing a platform package something, right? Maybe? All right, we'll do it the second time around in English. Close enough. Now it's verifying configuration. So at this point, my package installer has come down and has installed my Platform SSO app. The configuration profile has come down specifically for that SSO extension. And then I've also downloaded an auth URL. That's part of the configuration profile that's in there. And now you can see that's my Platform SSO application up there. Spent a lot of time on that icon. And I would appreciate you thinking nice thoughts about it. And then this is your standard PSSO setup in Swedish, correct? So we are still not enrolled in MDM. So now for this flow, we're doing password-based. This is where the device gets registered. The developers can put whatever screen they want up there. I do one here just to show that you can put a screen. And sometimes I use the developer URLs, which I'm going to use here, which means it's actually going to use my local machine for all the PSSO flows. So you can see some of the stuff going in and out, which maybe you get excited about, maybe not. All right, so I'm just going to hit OK. There's no authentication probably that's going to get needed here. I'm actually doing an attestation flow, so that's one of the reasons why it takes just a little bit longer on this to go through, because I'm actually getting attested keys from Apple, which is pretty cool, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So now I get to sign into my IDP, Patrick, and I would normally do an email address, but when I hit the ampersand, or the @ symbol, it's something else here. So I won't do that. So here's where I'm actually signing into my PSSO service using a username and password. And now I'm going to get presented with the auth URL that was part of the PSSO setup. And this is a space where you can put anything you want. I think some vendors, if they do all of this, are going to have this as an authentication process. Because you noticed in the previous username and password, you weren't able to use any MFA. All right? And if MFA is important to you, we can have a conversation with the good folks from Apple about using your device as a part of your MFA, which I think there's definitely some validity to it. However, if you are in an organization that requires an MFA process, and your regulators are assuming some sort of OTP code, God help you, or something else that you have to do around here, here's the opportunity where the vendor can put that together, right? I'm just going to have a little continue that you can hit. And now we're actually going to get to the beginning of the MDM enrollment. And you can see we're back to installing registration. This is where we're actually beginning the MDM process, all right? So here I am. I don't want to share my data, privacy something. All right. Something probably very few of you seen before. So this is another world premiere here. Very excited about this. The PSSO app can actually force the user icon, which is cool, right? Yay. Yay. And obligatory banana reference. Right? I mean, it's hard to see. Gemini made that for me. It says Banana King on the shirt. I didn't ask for that. But Gemini seems to be well-versed in Mac sysadmin. So there's a couple of things here that you'll notice. One, I can't change the username or password. All right? Those have been locked in because I'm using a password PSSO flow here. So the only thing the user can do, which I find a little bit curious, is they can pick one of the Fisher-Price pictures if they want. However, if they do that, the next time they do a PSSO authentication and it pulls back tokens, the app will actually update their image back to whatever the IDP wants it to be. So it's kind of a little bit, the illusion of freedom for the user to be unique, but then they get forced back into the cattle chute as they are there. So this is exciting because previously you had to have LDAP or something else involved to actually force the username and password. And in this case, with PSSO with passwords, during Adepso, you're forcing that username and password to be whatever the IDP accepted. All right? And at this point in time, as the user, I've got no other option. I've just got to hit force dot. Forchet? There's no C in there. All right. So now we're continuing through with the rest of this. And it's going to be a very similar ADE flow after that that we've got going on. We're going to walk through this. And sometimes, and I blame it on Tahoe, this does always seem to take a little longer at this stage, which is where I show you what's been going on behind the covers. Oh, there it goes. See, as soon as I move it on to something else. And here's the traffic that's been going through. We'll talk about this in a little bit about some of the things that are going on there and the actual attested keys that we've attested to that's been in there. So at this point, the local user account is created. As the previous session mentioned, if you do have a managed Apple ID, PSSO is available now at this point in the flow. So if I did open this up and sign into a managed Apple ID, or managed Apple account, sorry, that would be able to use PSSO to possibly streamline that quite a bit. We're going to skip that part. And I don't want to hop over. I want to, sure. This is where it's just muscle memory to click on the buttons. Yes, we'll turn on location services. Sure, we'll share data. No, we won't do screen. There we go. And yep. Nobody write that down. You might be able to hack into my Mac Mini. And then at which point we're going to be pretty much done with the flow. We choose light or dark. We'll keep it light. And boom, we are done. Now, hey. All right, so that's an Adepso flow. And if I go in here, ignore this little thing, and if I open up system preferences, we'll take you a look at a couple of things. First of all, if I scroll down to users, you're going to see here I am. I've already changed the picture again. If you noticed, it was slightly different than it was before. And that's every time the PSSO app gets engaged, it tells the system what the picture is supposed to be. And so even if the user changes it, it'll get changed back to here. And yes, the shirt does say Banana King. Again, blame Gemini on that one. All right, so here we go. If I look at the user, you can see that we've got it registered and tokens. So completely, in that sense, very seamless, very guided setup for the user as they have no choice but to not be here at this point in time, right? So they've got all the PSSO stuff working. Important to note, users created this way, unlike other users created via PSSO, are available for the user channel. Since this is the first user through the ADE process, I don't know why I got ADP on my mind, but I do. Through the ADE process, we'll get user channel enabled on that. Now, secondary users created by PSSO, none of that changes. They won't. But this one, since it was done through Setup Assistant, should have that. Other things that you'll notice in here, and this is kind of a fun one. If we go over here to General and we scroll down to Device Management, you'll see that we got a bunch of MDM profiles and all the other stuff that you would expect at this point in time in the session. But you'll also have this one down here. So this is kind of a fun one. This is the one delivered before MDM enrollment happens. Fun fact, if you mark that profile as unremovable, it's really unremovable. So it can't be taken over by MDM. So you want to kind of play around with this a little bit if you're doing this on your own. Make sure that you can actually take this over, or just hope you really pick good settings. Because you may not be able to change them going forward if you have it in there. And I'm not entirely certain. I asked some folks around what the expectation is here, and I didn't get any really clear answers as to how impermeable this profile is supposed to be. But definitely do take some thoughts on that if you're going down this direction of what you're able to do. So, all right. So now we're going to go in here real quick. And because it's a little bit different, I'm going to go down here and we're going to EEX. That's the proper acronym for this, right? Erase all content and settings. And I know that doesn't quite work out to be EEX, but we're going to go with it. Because ECAS doesn't, no, it's EACS. I guess it's EEX. Erase all content and settings. Otherwise, it'd be ECAS. All right, so while this is going to work, we're going to head back to the slides real quick and talk about a few other things. And then I'll show you the flow when it's just the SE keys that are available into this. So that's going to restart. And where is Keynote? There is Keynote. All right, so we're back in here. So we did it live. All right, and if you're from Australia, that was the required anvil drop. If you've been to X World or Dev World, they always like their anvil drops. So that's an anvil drop. This is also a Gemini created little token. I didn't show this to Patrick. Maybe you want to use this for it. For a world exclusive done here at Mac Sysadmin. I was actually pretty impressed. Gemini did seem to have some awareness. I didn't tell them it was an Apple conference. It figured it out on its own. So, all right. While that machine sets up, we're going to talk about a couple of things. Some fun aspects of this. You can install more than a PSSO app. You're installing a package. And that package comes down before enrollment, and whatever you put in that package will get installed on that machine. I don't know if there's a use case that makes sense of that, but just keep that in mind that if you do have something that you might want on there or maybe play around with before MDM enrollment, you now have an opportunity for doing that. As I mentioned, if you mark the SSOE profile as non-removable, it is very non-removable. All right, so keep that in mind. And then I also mentioned that PSSO isn't actually active during that auth URL session. So that might make it so you have multiple authentications still through here. In some cases, that may be good because if you do want to have an MFA prompt, you've got the ability to have that through a web page that you would, walk the customer through, walk the user through. If you want to have something, for example, with conditional access, it's going to be a lot easier to do it in that phase than it would be during the initial just username and password for the PSSO side. All right, and that should have gave us enough time. There you go. Mac is activated, so we're going to restart this. And while that happens, I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to change my profile. And instead of using passwords, I'm going to go in, and my authentication mechanism is the secure enclave. And we're going to show you there's a slight difference as this goes through between the two systems. So my service is starting back up again. My Mac has rebooted. It'll start telling me it's got a built-in screen reader here momentarily. How's the weather? It's good? It's actually, it seems warmer than normal, right? Maybe? All right, we're going to do a little easier for me. We're going to pick English as we go through here. So the difference between this run and the last run is that I am using secure enclave keys. And you're going to see a little bit different behavior as we go through here. I'm going to hit continue. Set it up as new. Yep, great. Accessibility, great. Device management, so here we're back to that same screen. And again, we're not going to MDM enroll here. Instead, we're just going to be doing the package and a single profile. And so you can see that retrieving enrollment profile, that comes down. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to see it installing the package. And if you want to, we can see this all going live here. And here we are pulling down the package. There's a manifest there, so we got to build a manifest that's got some things in it. It's verifying the configuration. I haven't spent any time trying to put more than an SSO profile in here. Since you can embed payloads into one profile, you probably could have other profiles get sent down. I don't know what you do with that, but it could be interesting. So now we're going to do single sign-on for the Mac, so that's great. We're going to hit continue. Same idea here. We've got the ability to show, and this is where we're going to do then the user registration. And what's going on here, and maybe we caught it, it was too quick. I'm actually doing all the attestation. So while that user registration is going on, I get device keys as part of Platform SSO, and they do come with an attestation statement that proves it's coming from a real hardware. And I get a serial number and the UDID in that. And so this is one of the ways that heretofore we didn't have a lot of good ways of getting very usable attestation early on in the MDM enrollment process. The Acme flows now do that, but this is another great way for the IDP to get attestation. Fun fact, it's signed by the Acme flows, you get signed by something else, or at least the MDM flows, your PKCS7 is signed by the iOS CA still. This is signed by an enterprise attestation CA. But otherwise, very similar to the Acme attestations. So we're just gonna sign in here, Joel1, sure, and my password. My IDP accepts any password for 24 hours for a user. So it makes it easy. I don't have to remember anything. All right, so we still get to the same place here. We have, this is gonna pop up and it's gonna show me the auth URL. I'm just gonna hit continue. And now it's retrieving an enrollment profile and it's gonna go back into the rest of it. The difference here, so far it's pretty much the same, right? The difference here is gonna be two things that'll point out. The first one is coming up really quick. That's here. I have the option of putting my password in. Well, I don't have the option. I have to put a password in. And there's no validation of this password back against the IDP. Even if you're using SE keys, which I think we generally agree, common held rule of thumb is the better way of doing this. If you can get out of the password synchronization game, you should. And I understand that is the person who created Nomad and did a lot of things that synchronize password on the Mac. I'm saying you should probably get out of the password synchronization business. If you're using the SE keys, you still have to have a username and password to sign into the IDP first. All right? So even though you're using SE keys throughout the rest of it, you still have to have a username and password for the IDP. And that may be complicating for some folks. I'm just going to put in a password here. Look at that. I got all green jelly beans. I have a strong password. All right, again, same thing. Even though I've dragged down an avatar picture, the user can still change. I'll go with the cow this time. And now it's creating the account. And on Tahoe, like 1 times out of 10, this never completes. And I don't think that's me. So I'm going to do what we did before, and we're going to distract it by going over here and showing, here's how some things are going on. Hopefully this works. If it doesn't, this is good. It's checking my app site association, creating an account in there. If it doesn't work, I've got a video of where it does, and I can show you the one other stage. Fantastic. The demo gods smile on me here. All right, so we're back to the managed Apple account. We're gonna set up later, skip, agree. We all agree, right? Everybody was here when I clicked it. Hit continue, continue, continue. Turn on, don't copy that down, continue. All right, and now you're seeing the continuation of the PSSO setup. All right, so here we have a space where PSSO now gets back engaged. Previously, and I don't know exactly what's going on under the hood, but my assumption is because the SE keys for a user are hard to make until that user's actually been created and signed in, we're now actually creating the SE keys for the user at this point in time during the setup, all right? Because otherwise, how would we have a set of keys if we don't have a user? Now we have a user, so now we can continue the setup, and it's at this point that the PSSO client can actually show its own UI. Because otherwise, I have no way of connecting that user that's local to who's in my IDP, because there's no other connection between these two pieces. So it's here that you'll probably also have some sort of sign-in. I'm a little annoyed. You can see I've got a, whoops, I keep using the wrong keyboard. I've got a sign-in with passkey here, which I'd really like to use, but I don't think it's available at this point. So I'm just going to sign in as one of my accounts up here. So now I've actually signed in, gotten tokens from my IDP. That I've then used to send back a registration process which allows my device to make that connection between this user that I just signed into the IDP and the SE keys that have been created with this user locally. All right, if you've been doing this with PSSO before, you were doing this from the little menu, the alert that came up, clicking on that, and then you typically be walked through an authentication. If you're using Microsoft, this would be through the company portal, right? So same thing here, but you can now show it during the actual setup assistant process, which is pretty cool. The user can't get around it. And then we're pretty much in the same situation that we were before. If I go down here to users and groups, you can see me, and again, even though I picked the cow, it overrode it, and I just have one of 4 random, and this was, I made this for X World. All the names are randomized. You might have seen I had some cool Swedish names that I thought were pretty fun, and this was for the Australian contingent. So there's Bluey the dog that's in there. And we've got registration and tokens and everything else in here. So that's the slight difference if you're gonna do this with a secure enclave flow, is that you have those pieces in there. All right. Fantastic. You've now seen more than I think almost anybody else in the world has seen about Adepso, because we've done these 2 flows live on stage at the 20th anniversary of Mac Sysadmin. All right, we showed you a little bit about it as we went through the registration. Key attestation I think is really cool. I think any PSSO vendor should be using it, because it does give you the serial number and the UDID of the device that you're connecting to. Otherwise, this is primarily only available to MDM services, and it's hard to then cross that blood-brain barrier of how the MDM shares that with your IDP, because they may or may not be the same vendor that you have. Even if they are the same vendor, you're still going to have some trouble actually crossing that blood-brain barrier sometimes. So this is allowed, started in 15.4, similar to Acme attestation, but the PSSO app has to do it. In the MDM flows, a lot of your calls get a PKCS7 kind of stapled to it, so you can use that to identify who the caller is. Here, the PSSO app has to do it. But it's really great, allows for much more secure device trust flows. World exclusive. I think this is the first time it's been shown in public, because I don't know that anybody else is doing it. On the device side, it can be done silently, which is great, because you won't have to necessarily push that registration token. If you've set up PSSO with Entra so far, I don't know how Okta does it, but in that SSOE profile, there's a device token or a registration token, I think something it's called. And in there, you have the opportunity to put a token in. If you're using the key attestation and you know the serial numbers that should be enrolling in your MDM, you shouldn't have to do that anymore. So that's great. For the user, if you're using SE keys for the user, you can now get attestation statements for those. And the takeaway for attestation statements is it proves it's coming from the secure enclave. It proves it's coming from valid Apple hardware. Apple's giving you a seal of approval that this is coming from the right place. And like I said, you get the serial number and the UDID. Both that serial number and UDID have been made up. But if they're yours, I apologize. That was purely random. All right, so some other ways that you can do this. You can actually push PSSO apps during await config. So I think on Jamf, this is called a pre-stage, correct? Other MDM vendors call it different things. But this allows you to push applications and profiles before the user signs in. If you do that, push your PSSO client app, push your SSO enrollment profiles, you'll actually get a pretty similar experience. The user will still be forced to create a username and password, but they have to do that anyway. It won't necessarily be synchronized with your IDP. However, during the setup assistant, they'll still go through the PSSO registration. And so in some cases, it may be even a smoother experience than using Adepso. So definitely play around with this. I think the folks at Jamf and probably some of the other MDMs are already doing a little bit with this. And maybe even Armin might show some of that or talk about it. He says yes. And I forgot, I was gonna have a joke about, I'm gonna show you something nobody else has ever seen before except for Armin, because like 2 years ago or last year, whenever I do this, Armin always says he's seen it, but I think he's lying. And so I was expecting him to lie again this time, but I forgot doing that joke, so I apologize. This kind of works well with third-party login windows, but I'm not here to endorse the use of PSSO with third-party login windows. Talk to your system vendor or your licensed Mac admin as to whether that's the right thing for you or not, as I'm not entirely positive what the interaction between those pieces are. You can also do it post-login. That's how we do it today, right? You deploy the PSSO client app and all the configuration profiles for it after the user is set up. Create the user however you want. If we had more time, I could show you. You can programmatically create a user on the device. Fantastic. As soon as you log in the first time, you'll go through that setup assistant process, and the PSSO piece will be embedded into that. So the user will not be able to hit the desktop until they've gone through that process and established their PSSO registration. So you may find that does all of everything that you need it for. So I kind of worked out a basic chart. First user via PSSO, if you want that or you're required to have that, you have to use Adepso. Every other flow, the first user is just a username and password that they put in, that they've created, all right? So Adepso will get you that first user created. You know, the caveat to that is if you're using Jamf Connect or Nomad Login, God help you, or Xcreds or any of the other third-party ones, you may have ways during await configuration of forcing the user to go through a cloud authentication first. And if you do that, await configuration may be what you're looking for. And then post-login. I'm having a hard time. You know, one of the stated goals, it's single sign-on, it's in the name PSSO. You still have a couple of authentications during the login process and the creation of that first user. And I'm kind of two minds about that. One, yeah, you do this once every 3 years when you get a new piece of hardware. You probably don't want to spend that much time removing one login from a flow that a user may only do once every 3 years, all right? And even with the full Adepso flow, I still believe that a lot of the vendors are going to require a multi-factor authentication for the user that's possibly more than just the device itself. All right, the key attestation helps with that, but I'm going to be interested to see where some of that goes. PSSO has become very, very configurable. In fact, we're now up to, when I counted in the profile, there's 53 keys that you can set in the single sign-on extension profile, of which includes some of the PSSO stuff. Keys that you might be interested in enable registration during setup. If you don't have that, you won't see the PSSO flow during Adepso. If you have that key set, but you don't have enable create first user during setup, you get into this really weird situation where it shows the PSSO registration, but it won't actually make a user from it. So it'll download the PSSO client, it'll download the profile, but then doesn't really do anything with it and takes you through the rest of it. I lost half a day thinking I was broken, but it was just the config profile that was off. Synchronized profile picture, that's the key now that allows, if your PSSO client supports it, the ability to synchronize the picture for the user avatar. And then finally, allow device identifiers in attestation will give you device identifiers. You don't have to allow attestation, but there's not that much point of attestation unless you get the serial number and the UDID out of it, as there's only so much that you can do with that information. It proves it's a key coming from the secure enclave, but you're gonna wanna have those serial numbers and other identifiers about it, so you're gonna be able to do that. All right, authenticated guest mode. I don't demo this because it's kind of pretty much just what you'd expect. It's PSSO, but with guests. It's a little bit, you can't have it, if you turn this on, Adepso fails, because it tries to create a temp user during the ADE enrollment process, which is kind of fun, and then everything goes to hell from there. So keep that key out. And it'd be maybe complicated to have Adepso and authenticated guest mode at the same time, but you end up with everything that you expect from a guest mode. So you got a temporary session that you have there. You know, when you log out, you get delete files and log out. And then the big piece to keep in mind here is that you have to use the other button. And I've sometimes had the other button doesn't always show up on the login screen, so then option return will force the username and password. I think I have that right. Option return or control return, one or the other, will force the username and password fields in there. And then you sign in with any user that's from your IDP, and you get a session in there. So it's cool. If you're into that, it's exciting. Use the other, and then go from there. The other thing that's been mentioned quite a bit, maybe not quite a bit, but certainly more than none, is the concept of tap to log in. And I'm actually really intrigued about this, mostly because I have a strange predilection for NFC. So I even have one of these readers, right? So this is an NFC reader that you can use. This is an ACR 1220U or something like that, something around those. It runs about, depends on where you get it, anywhere from 25 to 30 bucks. I will note, and I won't, in any picture showing tap to log in, they don't show the reader. They're not the prettiest of things. So keep that in mind. This one is USB-A. So I have this all set up. You've got to get a key out of the Apple Wallet, or at least potentially out of the Apple Wallet. Tap to log in, is, as best as I can determine, is using an Aliro key, A-L-I-R-O, which is a new format of kind of PKI for some of the building passes. So Siemens, HID, Thales, I think a few of the other ones that do physical security are all kind of behind this. And Aliro keys can be made on third party, don't have to be in Apple hardware. So you should be able to do this with Android and other devices that conform to the spec. If you're going to do it in the entire Apple model, you do have to get it into the Apple Wallet, which is cool, except getting the ability and the entitlement to get into the Apple Wallet takes a kind of a signed note from Steve, I believe, or maybe the Pope, one or the other will do. And so you have to do quite a few hoops. Swift Connect is one of the vendors that Apple has talked about. I spent 2 or 3 months trying to get this all put together between WWDC and now, because I was really hoping that we could do another world first here and show you a live tap to login. I'm now convinced it is not yet functional. I have a Swift Connect tenant, done a lot of work with them, and they'll be able to get you a key in the Apple Wallet, but there's a few more pieces that need to be put into place, I believe. Don't take any of this. I mean, the problem is I put this up on a slide and people believe that this is gospel for how this works. And most of this is me spelunking into the system and kind of talking to a few other folks out there. But you will need an NFC reader. And I believe the mechanism that it's being used is a crypto token kit. If you look in Tahoe, Crypto Token Kit now has the ability to use some of the NFC readers that are out there. And so that way your Aliro card, which is a certificate effectively under the covers, is being used as effectively a virtual smart card through an NFC Crypto Token Kit extension. So you can do this on iOS, should be available on Android, but you're gonna need an IDP that supports PSSO with smart cards. I believe is the flow that's going to be required on the back end, because you're actually assigning a certificate on your wallet to a user, and then you're using that to sign in again and be able to get credentials at that point. So keep in mind that there's going to be a certificate authority and a number of other pieces that are going to be involved in this. Like I said, I was hoping to show that, but I don't think everything's there yet. So guided Q&A. All right, we got to land this thing in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Is now the time to move to PSSO? Sure. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things with it. You should definitely 100% explore what Adepso gives for you, what that might enable in your fleet, and your estate of machines that you have out there. So definitely take a look at that. It's important as Mac admins that we understand this. Apple has been very, very clear about what their belief or vision of identity on the Mac is, and PSSO is 100% centralized into that vision and belief. So if you're going to be supporting Macs going forward, it's going to be much, much harder for you not to be doing something around the PSSO flows that are out there. So you should definitely be very aware of what those are and what they get you. Is Adepso worth the effort? Maybe? I don't know. I mean, it's good to have options. I'm going to be curious to see what MDM vendors pick this up. Jump Cloud specifically, since I can speak for them. We're intrigued and interested, but we already built about a whole bunch of hardware-backed token flows because we needed it cross-platform and we needed it before we got some of these pieces in PSSO. So I'm not sure if we're going to do much with this at this time, but right now it has all the functionality that I was hoping for. All right, and the big last missing piece of that was the creation of the user at the ADE flows so that you could have that fully streamlined and integrated into there. And so the fact that that's there and the key attestation is really exciting because it's otherwise a little bit harder to get attested keys out of on the Mac. Device check on iOS works out really well, but on the Mac it's a little bit trickier. Is tap to login deployable today? No. If somebody wants to challenge me on that, I'd love to see it because I'd be able to do that. Is the first PSSO user able to use user channel MDM? Yes, if done through Adepso. If you do it through different ways, your mileage may vary. It depends on how you do it because you're back to the same laws of physics that users created through Setup Assistant will have this, so fantastic. If you're creating it through a third-party login window or doing something else, you won't. PSSO doesn't really have any impact on that. And so now we've got 1:48, so I'm happy to do a loosely guided Q&A. We were moving pretty quick through a few things. So if there's any questions on what anybody's seen. Hands, no hands, Armin. Not even Armin. Wow, fantastic. Yeah. Ouch. Armin's done his homework. He has no questions. Yes.
What is missing from Platform SSO that you'd like to see in the next iteration?
I really just wanted to make it simple to do an IDP authentication, right? You may have users that don't have a username and password, but you want to use SE keys. You're now kind of stuck in the situation where you still have to sign in with the username and password to get the rest of Adepso to flow. I mean, and I get it, right? Apple still has, at its fundamental, a user has to have a password. That's just how macOS works. And at this point in time, I don't see any conceivable way, certainly not within the Tahoe timeframe. I would hope in the future timeframe, we get to some flows where we don't have that requirement. And then I think some of this would become a lot nicer. And I know we've got some folks from a certain software company in Redmond in the room, and I don't mean to make them overly, happy about their work, but I really like Windows Hello for Business, that setup, right? And that's what I think a lot of users wanted out of this, which is I just get kind of a web view, they don't even know it's a web view, but it's just sign in with a username and password and be done, right? All the rest of the stuff is taken care of for you because you've had that just single sign-in that you've got there. And ideally, maybe even through a passkey or something else. Like I said, I've had some trouble getting passkeys working during the ADE flows. And that's going to also be a big challenge, right? I mean, the world, IDPs are moving to users that never have a password to begin with. And I think we're still challenged fitting that into what PSSO can do now. Does that make sense? All right. Other questions? All right, fantastic. Thank you all very much.